We're going to get started now. So, welcome to our next edition of our Bigvision Recovery Culture Series. I am honored today to have a special guest, Dr. Jeffrey Altholz, known to me just as Jeffrey. Jeffrey founded Clarity Testing Services in Tarrytown, New York, back in 1995, and provides high-quality on-site testing services to comply with federal DOT drug and alcohol testing regulations for employers in the Northeast. And more recently, and very importantly, Jeffrey got involved with creating and maintaining drug-free workplace policies in many industries across the Northeast. And we have a lot to unpack today. First of all, welcome, Jeffrey. Thank you for being here. For those of you who don't know who I am Eve Goldberg, and I am the founder of Bigvision, and we provide a safe, sober space for young adults in recovery, and we create activities for them, sober activities, every month, a couple of times a month, and have online and virtual and in-person events. So you can follow us on Instagram. We're also a nonprofit, just so you know that. Donations are always welcome. So I'm going to start by just saying that Jeffrey and I have many conversations about this, and I kind of feel like New York, the smell of New York now has become marijuana, weed. It's no longer garbage, it's nothing else. That is the smell. And there's so much, I see it when I'm crossing the streets, and I see construction workers, and I see everywhere you go, people are smoking. And I have so many questions, and I'm sure you do also, to understand cannabis, just in general. So we're going to start with Jeffrey, who knows a lot about this topic. Give us a little bit of an intro and the history of cannabis.
Sure. So first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And this is a great forum to talk about this issue, which is unbelievably timely right now. Like you said, wherever you walk now in the city, the smell of New York City is the smell of weed. Coming up here, the guys unloading the trucks, by the garages, everything smells like weed now. So there's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's also a lot of good information, but you have to be able to pick through it to kind of find what you can really trust and believe. So the first place I think would be a good place to start is a little introduction to the history of the relationship between cannabis and human beings. The oldest known recording of anything related to cannabis is back in the year 10,000 BC, where on pottery there are actually designs of the marijuana leaf.
Wow.
10,000 BC. And again, through Egyptian times, Roman times, it was used as teas, and Persia, it had all kinds of uses, particularly the strain of cannabis that's used for hemp, which was a huge agricultural part of the United States of America until it became outlawed, and it's used mainly for rope and fabrics and things like that. Has very, very little THC content, so it was not really of interest to people looking for medicinal or other uses. But at least 400 or 500 years ago, it was used as some kind of a medicine for nerves, for sleep, for all kinds of ailments. So the history goes back a long time, and even in the 1930s, marijuana was legalized briefly here under what was called the Marijuana Stamp Act, where you'd have to go and buy a stamp for a certain amount of money that was stamped on it marijuana, and then you would actually go to a pharmacy and get it. Very similarly to how alcohol during Prohibition was prescribed. There are prescriptions of Old Forester, Seagram's, all of this on doctors' prescription pads for people to be able to use alcohol medicinally, whatever that means, during Prohibition. So fast forward to 1970, when the United States was in the grips of really the first opiate epidemic, and drugs were universally seen as bad. The government took a very strong position against drugs of all sorts, and everything got grouped in together. The big problem at that time was heroin. People were dying of heroin overdoses. and the government made schedules of things that were illegal and how dangerous they were. And at that time, in 1970, cannabis was given Schedule 1, which is the most intense. It means it's the most dangerous, the most addictive, and has no medical use whatsoever. And to this day, cannabis still remains on the federal DEA Schedule 1 list of drugs. Even though states have begun to legalize it, it is not legal on a federal basis, which is why dispensaries and all the marijuana businesses can't use the banking system, because the banking system is federal. You can't take cannabis on a plane, even if the states are legal, because airspace is federal. So there are all kinds of little carve-outs that have touch points with the federal government. And right now, all truck drivers who have to be drug tested, which is somewhere in the order of 13 to 14 million people across the US that have to be federal DOT drug tested, they still treat marijuana as a Schedule 1 drug. And if you test positive for that, you're treated the same as if you tested positive for heroin or methamphetamine or any of these much more dangerous drugs.
When you say treated the same way, you mean like treated
from an
the
employer
legal point of view,
yes.
from an employer point of
So
view.
someone who tests positive is immediately disqualified from doing their job. They can't drive. They're taken off their job. They have to be evaluated. They have to go for treatment, whatever the treatment that's recommended. They have to be evaluated a second time to make sure they've complied with the treatment.
Right.
Then they get tested again, and if they test negative, then they are eligible to go back to work. So that's the same with marijuana, as it is with heroin, as it is with oxycodone, as it is with methamphetamine.
Well, that seems very confusing when it's legal and people are just walking on the street. You can't smoke a cigarette walking down the street, but you
Right.
can smoke a joint. It blows my mind, which is why I really wanted to have this conversation with you, because it's disturbing.
It's
mean,
very confusing.
right. And one of the things, okay, I want to talk about legalization of recreational. Legalization and, what's the other word? Decriminalization are two different things.
Right.
Right. And that's really what we have to, people need to kind of understand also that legalizing something doesn't mean it's good for you.
That is correct.
Alcohol is not good for you. It's legal as long
Correct.
as you're over 21.
Cigarettes.
Whatever.
Cigarettes are
exactly.
legal, but nobody would argue they're good for you.
Right, exactly.
I don't think.
Yeah.
So, decriminalization was kind of a step towards legalization, and is still, in fact, the case in many states, where what they do is they don't change the law. They basically just agree that they're not going to enforce it.
Right.
That people who have less than a certain quantity of marijuana for personal use, they're not distributing, they're not doing things they shouldn't be doing while using marijuana, like driving, etc. In that situation, it's not a criminal offense. And that can mean you get like a parking ticket, or you get nothing at all. And states often will go through that phase before they get to full legalization.
Right.
Legalization means it's legal. There's no criminal aspect to it. And again, a lot of people have taken legalization to mean it's safe.
Right.
That it's safe. Because it's legal, I got it in a dispensary. The dispensary means that it's safe. It doesn't have pesticides, it doesn't have other heavy metals, it doesn't have chemicals. So yes, in that regard, it's safe. But when you go into a restaurant or a bar that serves alcohol, by law, there has to be a sign that says, consuming alcohol while pregnant will damage the unborn fetus.
Wow. Yep. Seen that many times.
In dispensaries, there's no sign. Okay? It is just not part of the current sensibility that there are these risks to people who are pregnant, people who are nursing, people who do things that they need to be focused, people that do childcare, people that do things that involve heavy machinery. There are so many situations, and because of a weird thing about cannabis that's like no other drug, which is how it's metabolized in your body, what happens is there's no good test, even now, for being impaired now. Okay, like with alcohol, you have a breathalyzer. If, let's say, you're driving erratically, you get pulled over, you get a breathalyzer test, and you blow 0.13. You're over the limit. You get arrested. You are impaired. Okay? Even if you say, no, I'm fine, I'm feeling very clear, officer, it doesn't matter. You have 0.13, we know that is impaired. No such standard exists for marijuana. And because of how it's metabolized in the body, marijuana is the only drug that is fat soluble instead of being water soluble. All the other drugs, the opiates, cocaine, methamphetamine, all of them, they're water soluble. What does that mean? It means that the metabolism is linear. So it'll go up when you first use it, and then it peaks, and then it goes down.
It goes through your system.
It goes through your system,
right.
and it's predictable. You see it going down each time.
Right.
If you don't use the drug again, it'll just keep going down until it's below detectable limits. With marijuana, because it's stored in different parts of the body, it goes up and down without using again. So someone can have a level that's going lower, and then all of a sudden it goes higher, not because they've used again, but because it's been freed from one of the compartments of the body,
right.
and it's now being metabolized. So it's very difficult to test for recent immediate use of marijuana. Loads of companies are working on that. Loads of new startups are looking at that issue. There's some progress, but right now we just don't have it. So that leads to a quandary of how do you know if somebody is impaired now?
Right.
And because you can't really know with a drug test, it leaves you guessing.
Now, couldn't it be like with alcohol, you have to be able to walk a straight line? When you smoke weed, is it easier to walk a straight line than if you have alcohol?
So
like, could that be a test?
It's really, there are, one of the things that some of the places, particularly Canada, that legalized weed across the whole country, what they did, because of this inability to test, they developed these mini tests that officers could use when they are pulling someone over, etc.
Right.
And it had to do with things like that. It had to do with walking a straight line, finger to nose,
right.
answering questions, and it was terrible. It didn't work, and they've largely abandoned it. So some other police departments around the country have tried that. It doesn't really work,
Right.
so it leaves you not really being able to know. And then what happened from that, particularly in New York, there's been an evolution where New York City first passed a law legalizing marijuana, the Cannabis Act. And what they said is that there are certain carve-outs, that you could still do testing for people who drive vehicles, people that do childcare, or people that do what's called safety-sensitive work, like somebody who's, an iron worker with a blowtorch
Right.
40 stories up in
This is
scaffolding
here, you're saying,
in
or
New York City.
In New York City.
In New York City. And that seemed like people were just getting their heads around that when New York State issued their rule called the MRTA, the Marijuana Taxate. One of them is tax. The T is for tax. Right. So they said, and the Department of Labor issued a guidance on this, that you can't test for marijuana, even in the setting of childcare, even in the setting of safety-sensitive things, even in the setting of driving a vehicle.
So you're saying if someone hires a nanny, right?
Correct.
And they come in and they're sure that they're stoned. You're sure that you can't test for it, but can you fire them?
So
I'm saying, or a school teacher or somebody like that.
It gets very tricky because what they've done is, in the New York State rule, is they've made the bar proving impairment. Now, proving impairment is almost impossible.
Right.
Beyond the shadow of a doubt, proving someone is impaired, very, very difficult, unless you have a lot of background data and the test and all of this. So at the end of the day, they do technically allow people to test for it. If you let's say somebody comes into to drive your truck and they smell like weed, their eyes look red, they're like, all the typical things of somebody who's under the influence. At that point, you document all those things. You could do that test in that particular situation, but there's no more general screening, and particularly with pre-employment tests. That was really a big one. So that when people apply for a job, you now cannot test for THC, and more exactly, you can't act on those results. So even if you did a test and it had that, you can't do anything about it legally. There's legal protection for that.
Right.
So it's a mess.
It's a mess.
It's a total mess.
So we're talking about legalization. I think couple of things. Number one, I think we should talk about Colorado, because I know there are a lot of statistics that have come from since they legalized it.
Sure.
And there's a lot of, everybody says, oh, it's been great for the economy. And you know what? Yes, it brings in money. It brings in tax dollars. And that's, at the end of the day, is what everybody cares about. It's what the government cares about, unfortunately,
right.
And they discount the rest of it, the dangers of it. Like little things to me, what bothered me, if I had a small child now and I was walking down the streets of New York, you have to start at a very young age explaining to them, what is that smell? What are those people doing? There's it just doesn't make sense. And right now in New York, it's like the Wild West. I mean, people are selling, joints on the street. You have no idea what's in there.
Right.
So, I mean, I understand legalization, but like you said, there have to be a lot of laws attached to it, and like you said, there's no sign. I can't believe in dispensaries it doesn't say anything about like the dangers to a pregnant or nursing mom. It says it in a coffee shop probably.
Right. If they serve beer, and they do, right?
It's crazy.
It's very hard, and the effects that you're talking about, the cultural effects, are very difficult to measure exactly. It's a soft finding, whereas tax revenue and votes, those are very easy to measure. So let's talk about Colorado for a couple of minutes. Colorado legalized cannabis for recreational use in 2014. So there's now an 8-year experience on what happens. There are a couple of bright spots, so let me start with those. The first is that in self-reporting and testing of middle school students, since legalization, those rates have not gone up.
Okay.
Once you get to high school students, and once you get to certainly college-age students and adults, use goes way up. Okay, so overall use goes up. What does that mean? Again, we don't have a lot of data in this country on safety issues. So when in 1970 cannabis was made a Schedule I drug, what that also means is you can't do research on it. You can't possess it. You can't cultivate it. You can't transfer it without all kinds of, like if you wanted to do research on heroin, it's extremely difficult. You need all kinds of safeguards and all kinds of protocols to be able to do that.
Because you're testing it on people.
On people, or even just having the substance. Having heroin for research purposes is extremely difficult. It's doable, but it's very onerous. So if people have a choice to study one drug versus another, a Schedule I drug they're going to avoid because of all the built-in requirements of custody and control and all of that. So there's really not a lot of data. The best data in the world now comes from 2 countries where research was allowed, even though one of the countries, which is Israel, marijuana was still illegal, but research was not in any way challenged or restricted. And there's a guy at Hebrew University there who did amazing research for many, many years. So there's good data from there, and there's also good data from Holland. In Holland, also they've made it much easier to do research on it. The US is playing catch up on that, and as you could see, I mean, this is so widely used. It's something that so many people are using that to just have no data on it and to put restrictions in front of people who want to do research on it are just working at cross purposes.
That's insane.
So getting back to Colorado for a second, if you look at things that are easily measurable, you can see that in 2014 certain things did dramatically change. One is the number of emergency room visits related to cannabis went way up. So people who are having panic attacks, people who are having all kinds of reactions, mainly psychological and mental health issues, but people get palpitations, they get all kinds of other things as well. So ER visits go way up. Car accidents go way up.
Can I just tell you something? I live not far. Can I tell you something? Yeah, I'm telling you. I'm not asking for The Holland Tunnel,
Right.
the entrance to the Holland Tunnel is near
Right.
where we live.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I walk down the block, and
In traffic, everybody's
smoking weed out of their cars heading back to New Jersey.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't understand. I mean, the cops wouldn't even do anything about it if they were there.
Well-
but it's like you're driving your car. You can't have an open, you can't have alcohol in
beer,
your car,
right.
but you could smoke a joint in your car. It's like, of course there are going to be more accidents.
There
It's
are
just,
more accidents, and there
exactly.
are more workplace accidents.
Exactly.
And in New York State, I don't want to get too far afield with this, but one of the things that I do related to the workplace, the drug-free workplace policies, is I work a lot with the construction industry, which has an enormous problem with all kinds of drugs. And in New York State, there's a law that says that if somebody gets injured at work and they're standing on anything other than the floor, it's the employer's fault. It's 100% the employer's fault. Okay, so even a piece of plywood, a little,
no matter what the accident is,
doesn't
or what's
matter. You could
causing
be
it, you're
drunk
saying.
and lighting whatever. It's all the employer's fault if you're standing on anything other than the floor. So the New York is the only place that has that. It's called the Scaffold law, and people have been trying to repeal it for many, many years, but they've not been able to. So when you have that, that leads to way, huge increases in insurance costs for doing big projects. You see this now with not being able to test for marijuana. So there are all these ripple effects in various industries related to the fact that people are going to have more car accidents. They're going to be having more workplace accidents. And that's going to all be on the employers. And those are the insurance companies are going to have to pay for those things. So the cost of doing business in New York
It's just going to keep going
is
up.
going to be even higher than it is now.
Okay, I just want to put it out there to everybody who's on that we are going to have questions and answers. So if you want to start putting them in the chat, and Astrid can call them out, we'll get to them. And I have so many more questions to ask, but okay. So what else did I want to talk about? Wait, what were you saying?
Well, about Colorado,
Oh, yeah,
let's
Colorado.
talk about the money,
Yeah.
because
Yes.
when you look at how much money cannabis sales have generated in Colorado, it's astronomical. At this point, cannabis sales and the taxes on cannabis sales are about 1% of the entire state budget. They're financing schools and hospitals and roads and all of this, and it's hundreds of millions of dollars. And that's really what's driving a lot of the political interest in this. It's really, not a societal change. People say, oh, this will be good for society. This is really good. We should do this. It's really about the money. There's a tremendous amount of money in it.
Huge. So one of the things that I've been reading a lot about this, and you can talk more to it, is that, I was like the weed that existed back in the 70s when we were like teenagers. I don't want to give away your age, but when we were teenagers, we know.
It's the
I mean,
1970s,
it was
right?
the 1970s, I believe.
Yeah.
And it was nothing like the potency was nothing like
No,
what is
that's
out
a
there
great
today.
point. That's a great point.
And people do not realize that. And you don't know what exactly, I guess in dispensaries, what you're getting, sort of.
Not really,
but
not really. You can in certain products, but again, with all of, herbs and plant-based medicines, Western medicine has always tried to find the active ingredient, quote unquote, whatever that is, and then, synthesize that and make that into the product. So there are many, many examples of that in cardiology and other things, Foxglove and Digitalis and all of these things. So the same thing has happened in the weed market, which is people are going to the dispensaries looking for things that are going to get you high. So THC is the thing that gets you high in cannabis. However, there are hundreds of other molecules in cannabis. Cannabinoids. There's CBD, CBN, CBG. Every week they're discovering more and more of them. And the effect of the plant as a whole is very different than the effect of just THC oil that's been pulled out of these plants and then synthesized and again made more and more concentrated. So you have now these products that are waxes
Like the dabs
and
yeah.
resins and
Yeah.
things which can be 95% THC.
And what it used to be, what,
Back
like
in the
10,
day,
15%?
lower.
or
Back in the
something?
day, in the 70s, you had 3%, 5%.
Oh my God.
You can buy in dispensaries now flowers, actual weed that has 22%, 26%. But again, it's in the context of all the other cannabinoids. It's not just THC oil. But a lot of the vapes, a lot of these other things are just THC oil that's extracted, no other cannabinoids, and it's just that. So that also has a different effect than the plant itself, than the entourage
Right.
effect.
So what would you say to parents who say, oh, my kid's fine, he just smokes weed? Like, parents think that it's very innocuous, that, oh, they just smoke weed. It's not heroin, it's not this.
Right.
Can you get addicted to it? And,
Yeah.
and can people have hallucinations and other, I mean, I'm told
Sure.
that there's a lot of that now.
Absolutely, yeah. So one of the things that we didn't talk about with Colorado is that not only did ER visits go up, but also hospital admissions went up, and the hospital admissions were almost all psychological, where people do have intense reactions,
Right.
which at this level, again, there's no data. There's never been 95% THC products widely available. So we have no idea what the effect of this is on the body, but what we do know is that one, it's much more addictive. Two, you have a much higher risk of a psychotic episode,
Right.
a psychotic break, which again, depending on the person's mental health coming into it, you may or may not come out of. It could be something that could be long lasting, like the beginning of schizophrenia and other things. So there are lots of problems with that, and keep in mind the context of our own history. And that is, we've had now, year after year, tens of thousands of people dying, young, healthy people dying of opiate overdoses. Okay? It's the drug supply in the country has been poisoned with fentanyl and benzo and all these other things. So in reaction to that, people are saying, you don't die from weed. Weed, at least it's not going to kill you. And in most cases, that's true. People, the drug itself is not going to give you a fatal reaction. So kind of like in 1970 when people were crazy with heroin the last time, people said, it's just not really a totally rational approach, but at least it's not going to kill you. Now, parents that say that usually don't know about these 95% resins. They don't know about these ER visits. There's also a problem that's now a national problem, which maybe you've heard of, where chronic users of high THC resins develop this syndrome called hyperemesis, where they have uncontrollable vomiting for days or weeks. Sometimes they need to be hospitalized to be given fluid because they can't take anything in. And it's always, young people who are otherwise healthy on no other meds, but they're increasingly using more and more potent strains of these THC products. And it's now a known thing in the emergency room. Oh, it's another, hyperemesis. It used to be rare.
Wow, that's crazy.
And it's now very, very widely happening.
I am going to just see, I think we have some questions.
Oh, good.
How do you suggest people who struggle with addiction to include marijuana in their life?
That's tough. That's a really tough question. In most situations, people that have a strong history of addiction or an addiction that has altered the trajectory of their life are better off not using marijuana products. Because you just don't know. You just don't know. The chemistry is unknown, how that clicks, how something happens. Over time, maybe we'll have a better sense of it. But right now, as I was saying before, there's been so little research. The safest bet is to avoid it. Let me just add one more thing to that. There are other cannabinoids that are much less, almost zero chance of addiction. And those are the pure CBD products. So CBD products come in two varieties. Some of them have a little bit of THC in them, and others have 0.000. So if there's no THC and just CBD, that has been tested and seems to be quite safe. And in a lot of people, they feel a little
more
relaxed,
right.
a little muscle relaxation, but not a buzz. You
Right,
don't
it's
feel
different.
it's a different thing.
Right.
But again, you have some of the what are thought to be some of the health benefits of the cannabinoids, because we
Right.
didn't talk about that. There are definitely some health benefits, but there are just so many of these big societal negatives that it needs to be kept in balance.
Got it. Let's see. What are the effects on a fetus or babies? Is there new data on this now that more people are using marijuana?
Unfortunately, the answer to that is yes. People who are fetuses that are exposed in the uterus to marijuana definitely have higher rates of preterm birth. They have higher rates of premature birth in terms of their weight, having low weight, and they also have lower what are called APGAR scores, which is like the kind of alertness of a newborn baby. And that's also the same related to mothers who are nursing, who use cannabis, and then it's transferred through the breast milk to the babies. And there are very significant effects related to that, but because it's so new, we don't really have really good data on it, but the data we do have is bad. This is definitely
Although I have
something.
to say, I have a hard time imagining that if you're a mother breastfeeding your child, that you're going to be looking to get high probably, because you're
Right.
looking to escape. Not a good idea.
But that's
though.
the thing. But there are different, again, marketing and social media can play a very important role here. So people who, like when they're pregnant and they get nauseous, hey, you should use cannabis.
That's not recommended by doctors.
No.
Okay.
Social media.
Right, social media.
Social media says, you should. Yeah, it's very good for nausea. You should try it. People that get postpartum depression. Oh no, it's really good for depression. So you see things. We see fetal alcohol syndrome, where mothers that are drinking during
absolutely.
pregnancy, drinking during breastfeeding. So.
But that's what you hear about. You don't hear about this.
Not
And
true.
I'm sure it's happening also, but it's just not discussed because people are not as open about, I was nursing my baby and I used cannabis. People,
Right.
they might say, I had a drink, I had a little bit of alcohol or something, but they're not open about that yet.
Right. The data that I saw recently is that the numbers keep going up in terms of both self-reporting and people who test positive at either maternity clinics, OBGYN clinics,
Right.
some of the teaching hospitals that collect this data for research purposes, and that it has gone up and up and up, and that somewhere possibly as high as 30 to 35%.
Wow. Of nursing mothers.
Of people at these clinics. It was not all mothers, but it was people who were tested.
Okay, another question. In terms of helping conditions like Tourette's, where marijuana isn't necessarily proven, but there has been cases where it helps, how do you feel about this?
So I think that's a very interesting question. Let me step back I'll come back to Tourette's in 1 second, but I think it's important to understand how these substances work in the body. The receptors that marijuana, or particularly THC and the other cannabinoids, they bind to, were only discovered in the 1990s, okay? So this is a very new science in terms of how these effects are mediated chemically in the body. There are definitely cannabinoid receptors in the brain, we know that, but there are also cannabinoid receptors all through the body, in the gut, in muscle, nerves, and some of the cannabinoid receptors don't bind THC. They only bind other chemicals in the cannabis plant, like CBN, CBG, etc. So this is an evolving field, and there will be There's already one cannabinoid medicine that's been FDA approved now. So to add to the confusion, I told you before, the DEA says that all cannabis is Schedule 1.
Yeah.
The FDA, which is separate from DEA, has taken a CBD product from a pharmaceutical company that's been proven to reduce seizures in children that are unable to take other medicines or are resistant to other medicines. So the FDA has approved that as a Schedule 4 drug, which is much less, even though the other hand is saying Schedule 1 that can't be used for any medical purposes. So it's very confusing.
Yeah.
So getting back to Tourette's, ultimately there will be studies that look at which cannabinoids are optimal for a condition like Tourette's and the many subtypes of Tourette's. We're not there yet. In general, THC is like a little bit of a spin of a roulette wheel. It might have a good effect at some point, but it would be just intuitively hard to see how that would be consistently something you can rely on, that effect. Whereas something like CBD, which is a muscle relaxant and a nerve relaxant, might have a more potent effect, and you might be able to use it in much higher doses because it's not psychoactive.
Interesting. That makes sense. What is this? Vice has a great spotlight about the fentanyl epidemic.
Oh, yeah.
How do you suggest trying to solve something like the fentanyl epidemic? Oh boy, that's a topic. that's big. That's a whole other.
I saw the Vice special. I would recommend it to anyone who hasn't seen it. It's certainly eye-opening. But it speaks to really what's happened in this country. You know, up until in 2020, with the pandemic, the rates of overdoses were at a record rate, over 70,000 in 1 year, 70,000.
I think it's over 100. It was over 100,000.
2021, that rate, which was the highest ever,
Right.
went up by almost 50%. So it's now over 100,000.
Right.
Correct. And it shows no sign of abating. Based on a little bit of COVID, but the main driver of the fact that the life expectancy in this country is going down is opiates.
Yep.
It's not COVID. COVID helped, but before COVID, we started seeing it already with the opiates. So this is a problem of huge proportion, and something that just intuitively makes the most sense to me is that you have these states that are now pulling in hundreds of millions of dollars from the sale of cannabis. Why not take that money and bring it to treatment and bring it to intervention and bring it to things that are safe?
And Bigvision also.
And Bigvision, a couple of $100 million.
A couple $100,000 I'll take. Yeah, just so you know out there, we'll take a couple $100,000 also. No, but honestly, I mean, treatment is so important, but it's not everything. And at the end of the day, during COVID, the beginning, the first year, we lost a lot of our community. And people, we did virtual events, we invited them, people couldn't even show up because they were just isolating. They were, you know, it's so hard for everybody. COVID was difficult, we were all isolated. But when you're dealing with, you know, issues that a lot of these people have, mental health issues and addiction issues, nobody wanted anybody to see them, and they were probably sitting at home drinking. You know, I mean, that was a huge problem. Yeah. Alcohol was considered essential. So liquor stores stayed open during the beginning of COVID. And dispensaries, like, that was great. So, like, everybody can sit home now and get stoned and drink. And we lost people, lost them, you know, just died. And then a lot of them just kind of disappeared, relapsed. What we're all about, and it's we're fighting this opioid crisis, and every single day we're helping people, but it's a huge problem, and it's not, you're right, it's not going away, and that would be a great idea. Let's suggest that they put that money exactly.
That money shouldn't go into the coffers of highway repair and all of that. There's plenty of money for that.
Right.
This is an urgent need that is affecting the public health of this country.
Yep.
It's generating a tremendous amount of money. And again, I can't prove this, but there's no doubt in my mind that the legalization of cannabis has given this kind of aura of, you know, safety and it's okay, and it's kind of like the way people advertise alcohol. You don't see people, you know, struggling at the back of an alley at the middle of the night, you know, in a terrible way. You see people on a yacht.
They're the coolest people, rich, cool, like that.
It's presented that way, and the more it's presented that way, it makes this worse, because it worsens the shame, it worsens the image, and those are such powerful marketing tools. You know, they spend so much money on that. So I think also, you know, doing what Bigvision does in terms of doing it in person, you know, Zoom and Teams and all of that it was better than nothing.
Yeah, for sure.
In business, it was better than nothing.
Yeah.
In you know, we did some you know, family get-togethers by Zoom. It was better than nothing. But it's not the way people can really connect at the level that they need to connect to deal with, you know.
No, it doesn't replace human contact. There's no question. I mean, you know, it's so important, that connection that you make with other people. It's important just in life in general to be part of a community. We've always known that. But for people who are struggling, it is a lifeline, literally a lifeline. And that's kind of what we do. All right, we're going to have to stop soon, so let's go. How do you know early on if you have an opioid addiction?
Opioid addiction.
And will you run for president, Jeffrey? I know who's saying this. Okay.
Sophia?
Yep. Christine says we need more conversations like this. What do you suggest in building the big vision? What do you suggest? Let's answer. What was this one? How do you know early on? Well,
so
if you think you have a problem, you have a problem. I'm not a doctor, but that's what I would say.
Correct. If you think you have a problem, you probably have a problem. Some of the signs, I mean, it really depends on what role the drug plays in your life, and only you can know that. You know, there's no objective thing that says, oh, if you took 3 of these pills on Wednesday, you have a problem. It doesn't work like that. It really depends on what it means to you, and in the context of your life, what does the drug, what effect does it have, and how does it influence the rest of your life? So if you start avoiding doing things that you generally get pleasure from, if you avoid seeing people or going out or doing a sport or getting involved with something, and you find that the thing that's getting in the way is the drug, you know, that's usually a sign that it's a problem. Certainly if you wake up in the morning and you're thinking the first thing, how can I get my drug? That's probably also a pretty strong indication that it's a problem. But you can have a problem before it becomes a physical addiction. Again, there are drugs that are less physically addictive that could be just as menacing and just as destructive to your life. That was one of the myths about cocaine early on. You know, after the heroin epidemic of the 70s, you know, in the 80s, people discovered cocaine, and cocaine use is different. You can't keep doing cocaine every day because the neurotransmitters in your brain get depleted, and you have to sleep. You will not get high anymore. You stop getting high. So you'd wait a couple of weeks and then do it again. Whereas if you waited a couple of weeks between use of heroin, people might say, oh, you don't have an addiction. It's not a problem. So cocaine seemed to be one of those things that said, oh no, it's not a problem. It's not addictive. Cocaine is not addictive. Yeah. I can stop anytime. In fact, I stop every 2-3 days. You know, it really depends on the pattern of what it does to you. And again, the emotional connection that you have with the drug. And only you can know that. Only one individual can know that for themselves.
Okay, so I think we're gonna go. It's 5:45. So I think we need to have you back, Jeffrey, because I feel like there's more questions. I have more questions.
I would love to come back. I also would love, we could do a session on opiates specifically.
Yes, that would be good.
There's a lot of stuff to talk about with that. A lot
for
of
sure.
stuff.
And if people have questions going forward and they want it, they could just send us the questions. We'll send them to you, and you'll answer the questions.
Absolutely.
And I think we covered a lot. And Jeffrey, I want to say thank you so much for being here. You are. I mean, I've always known how smart you are. You know.
You're my biggest fan.
No, Sophie's your biggest fan. She wants you to run for president. I wasn't going there, but maybe. But anyway, yes, this was amazing, informative, and really helpful. And I think we could learn a lot from this. And we're going to post it on our social media so people who didn't get to join now will be able to watch it.
Okay.
And yeah, we always do that. And again, thank you. Thanks for joining us, and have a great night.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.